Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Nell, and I work here in the Liberal Arts Career Enrichment Network. Thanks for joining us today for our Alumni Career Conversations series. I'm really happy to welcome Todd Kahn as our speaker today. Todd is a 2015 Penn State graduate, and he majored in labor studies and employment relations and minored in psychology with the business option. I had the good fortune to work with Todd when he was a student, so it's a lot of fun for me to see him back here in his professional capacity. He currently resides in New York City, working at ViaCom CBS on their campus and early career recruiting team. Since graduation, Todd also has worked in some HR roles with other organizations, and we're going to let him tell us a little bit about that today. And he can also share a little bit of information about his own internship experience when he was a student. So we're really excited to have Todd join us today to share an overview of his career and his advice for current liberal arts students with an interest in human resources. So welcome, Todd.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. All right, so like Susan said, I'm going to start off with just a quick bio about myself, my career journey at Penn State and post-grad, and then kind of diving into what HR is, what I thought HR was in college versus what I think it is now, and just ending with some advice. So like Susan said, I started off as a labor studies and employment relations major. I actually started at Penn State as just general psychology, and I was placed into a seminar that was focused on LER. And within that first semester, it solidified my interest in human resources. So by the end of my first semester, I met with my advisor and chose to change my major to LER and ended up minoring in psychology with a business option. So it was really exciting to learn more about human resources because I think we all kind of have our opinion of what we think HR is, but I think diving deeper into the coursework, it really helped me shape my opinion of where I could see myself post-grad. So throughout college, I was involved in a few different activities. I was involved in LAUC, the Liberal Arts Undergraduate Council. I was also a part of the Liberal Arts Envoys, which I believe is now called the Liberal Arts Ambassadors. I was involved in Thon, and I was also a Lion Ambassador. Another thing that I took part in during my time at Penn State was I was a part of the Liberal Arts Alumni Mentor Program. So I believe starting the end of my sophomore year, I was aligned to a mentor who I kept through graduation. And she was really instrumental in helping me navigate not only my time at Penn State as an HR major, but also looking at internships, looking at post-grad opportunities, and figuring out where my career path made the most sense. So very invaluable experiences at Penn State, and I definitely think it shaped me to where I am now. So we're going into my senior year of college. I knew I wanted to have some type of HR experience to kind of figure out where it made the most sense for me to go. And I ended up working at Liberty Mutual in Boston. And I was a training and development intern, so I got to focus on building learning and development opportunities for people at Liberty Mutual. And why I found that role very interesting is because that wasn't an area of HR that I've seen when I was at school. So being able to practice a new area of HR, kind of maybe take a step back and realize that there's a lot more to HR than I originally expected, which was a really helpful experience as I navigated the career search post-graduation. So for my first 4 years out of college, I was at JP Chase. My first 2 years were in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, and my second 2 years were in New York City. So for my first 2 years at JP I was in an HR rotational program. So you rotate through 4 different areas of human resources for 6-month periods. And that role in that program was, to me, super instrumental. I didn't really know a ton about the different areas of HR, nor where I wanted to see myself long-term. And the different roles that I were in, I really kind of saw the different skill sets that I liked that I got to work on, but also different projects and different people. And it really helped me solidify my career path going forward. So I rotated through compensation, data and analytics, learning and development, and project management. And through all of those, I really enjoyed just the people management and the people engagement and the development piece of all of it. So when I graduated from the program, I ended up managing the program that I went through, as well as the internal audit program. So it was a really full circle moment, but really solidified my interest in campus recruiting, which was something that I didn't rotate through, but I realized just from learning more about the different facets of human resources that that's where I saw myself long-term. So I've been in human resources and campus recruiting pretty much ever since. I've worked at Deloitte as a campus recruiter. I've worked at American Express managing all of their intern programs. And most recently and currently, I am at ViaCom CBS. So I am on the campus and early career recruiting team, and I focus on strategy operations. So my role is taking a step back from actually the recruiting piece and looking at all the processes that we do on the recruiting side and finding different ways to operationalize and strategize and streamline everything that goes in and out of our team. So it's a role that I think all my experience led me to this role. It's a little more strategic than roles I've been in the past. And I think it's really helped me kind of get a full understanding of the campus recruiting space and just how to be the most effective, efficient, and innovative in general. So that's a quick bio about myself, but wanted to dive deeper into what human resources is for me versus what it was to me when I was in college. So I put together 2 slides. I will quick share my screen and show. So this slide is where if you were to ask me what HR was in college, these are probably the main things I would say. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about hiring, firing. A lot of my classes also focus on employment law and union. So very early on at my time at Penn State, I assume that's like really what HR focused on. I've never watched The Office, which I know I need to, but I know everyone who hears I'm in HR automatically says, oh, you're like Toby from The Office. And I'm sure, there may be some parallels. I can't confirm or deny because I've never seen The Office, but that's where I've gathered from Toby is where the next bullet came from is bad cop. I feel like even when I talk to some of my friends now, they're always like, oh, I have to go talk to HR, which they're talking to a specific group in HR versus the whole HR function, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And then what my parents told me, I think neither of my parents were in HR, but I think they've been in corporate America long enough to gain a kind of opinion of what they thought HR was. And I'm happy that I did not listen to that part of their advice because I've been in HR ever since and I can't imagine being anywhere else. So this is kind of where, I guess, almost 7-8 years out of college of what I've kind of learned to understand what HR actually entails. These are just a few of the different areas of human resources. So when someone always asks me like, oh, like, what is HR? Like it's a very long-winded answer because there's so many different areas. And I think there's something really for everyone. The way to describe human resources is that it's kind of like behind the scenes operations that keep a company afloat, and especially the employees, that they're almost like the unsung heroes because you probably don't realize how many things that you do on the day-to-day basis were started or are operating through human resources. So I can quick run through some of these areas. Some of these I rotated through and some of these I've just seen from managing the HR program. But right now I'm in campus recruiting. So we focus on anyone who's in an accredited university or college, as well as early career recruiting, which is kind of more on the experience side. So those entry level, more experienced, higher positions. Talent and performance management. So this is one of those areas when I managed the HR program that I found that a lot of interns didn't know about, but then ended up loving this area. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the learning and development bullet as well, of just focused on like developing our internal employees and finding those like different skill sets that they want to hone in on and develop, and finding different ways to also like manage performance. And when you think about like bonuses and just performance reviews, like being able to manage those initiatives has been something that our interns have really enjoyed working on. And it's something that I wish I knew about when I was in at Penn State in some of my classes, because it was an area that I just find so fascinating. Diversity and inclusion is another big one, especially with our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. This is an area where a lot of people thrive in, and it's a growing space in pretty much every company. An HR business partner, you're kind of like a jack of all trades. I used to think if I didn't place any campus recruiting, I would have placed into an HR business partner role post the rotational program, because you pretty much need to be able to see every area of human resources. And you see the word business, you're really a partner to the people within the business. So you'll have different clients who work within the company that you work on. They're not in HR, but you get to really see the full scope and provide that support that the business needs in order to really execute on pretty much every other bullet on this slide. Learning and development, this was probably my favorite rotation that I went through. This is a role that's really focused on training and just building the skill sets internally. So for example, one of the projects that I worked on when I was in my learning and development rotation is that I built a training program for digital fraud at JP Morgan. So pretty much anyone who's going into digital fraud got to go through this training program. And I remember looking at it and I was like, I don't even know what digital fraud is. And the way that this is set up is not the most conducive way to really explain what it is. And I found that there's so much creativity within this space that I got to build out a brand new training program from the ground up. And it's just a really exciting area to help people get to like another step in their career that may help them get a better job or just find a better area of whatever company or job that they're looking at. that may be a benefit that they didn't know prior. Compensation, how we get paid, similar to payroll and benefits. This is another big area of human resources that is pretty much in every company. These last two were two other rotations that I had. Data and analytics, big on reporting, big on numbers. I left my compensation rotation realizing that I was just not Excel savvy, and I needed to kind of get a better sense of just how to navigate Excel, VLOOKUPs, pivot tables, all that jazz. So I asked my program manager if I can go into an analytical role, which is where I ended up for my second rotation. So we got to report on pretty much every facet of the company, a lot of employee relations cases, which I don't have on here, but employee relations is another area of human resources. Probably most common when you hear someone say, oh, like I need to talk to HR, they're probably talking to employee relations. But we got to do a lot of reporting on the back end of that, which was awesome. And then general project management. My last rotation, I got to work on a bunch of different initiatives on the Chase side of the bank at JP Morgan. And it was really cool and helped me kind of gain the overall sense of just organization, how to be strategic, how to just streamline processes and get everyone just more organized in general. I know I ran through that pretty quickly, but I just wanted to kind of showcase that there's so many different areas of HR. And especially as you're thinking if HR is the right fit for you, you can even silo into one of these different areas and realize like, I want to go into compensation. I have some friends who I met in my HR program who have never left compensation the same way that I've never left campus recruiting. Because once you find your niche or kind of what area of HR is the best fit for you, you can really hone in on that and build a career there. So this is just to say this is not even all the areas of HR, but just shows how broad of a scope HR is. And I think there really is something for everyone. And I think especially where your skill sets are probably the most prominent, there's definitely a role within human resources for you. So I'll stop sharing because I want to move to my notes because I put together some tips that I thought would be helpful to navigate before we open up for questions. So I split up my advice into two sections. One of just like me, Todd, giving just general advice that I helped me navigate my career search, but also some recruiting tips as well, because I am in campus recruiting. And we are in the midst of the recruiting season for summer 22 opportunities. Crazy that we're almost in 2022, but as you guys are navigating that internship search or just general career search, I hope these tips can be helpful for you guys. So the first advice that I had was just be open-minded and don't be afraid to ask questions. That's probably one of the biggest, probably the two biggest areas of advice that I tell interns, especially the open-minded piece, because if I would have just stuck to what I thought HR was when I was navigating like my internship search and my post-grad job search, I don't think I would have gone to where I am now because I kind of went into it knowing I don't know all of everything that HR has to offer. So I kind of let my program manager kind of help me navigate the different areas, which showed me that there was so much more to HR than I originally thought. And I think that if I was a little more closed-minded as I was when I was looking for jobs, I don't think I would have gone to where I am now. I kind of mentioned this on the previous slide, but don't let anyone tell you what's best for your career. I'm someone who always just solicits advice for everything in my life. And I realized very early on with human resources that I think, again, from that one slide I showed, I think people have a perception of HR that may not necessarily be what it actually is. And I think being able to kind of figure out what's best for you, because you're the one who has to wake up every day and go to the job. And to me, I can't imagine anywhere else in terms of human resources or another function at a company that would be a benefit for me. So that's something that I'm happy I stuck to and didn't let any outside opinions kind of force me into another career that may not have been the right fit. Another thing is look into rotational programs. This is something that I realized early on when I was looking for my first opportunity post-graduation. Some internships will have an offer at the end of the summer to join you for the following summer, but rotational programs are really probably the biggest initiative for a lot of companies to bring in junior talent. And I realized that when I was applying for jobs my senior year, that the only roles I was hearing back from were those rotational programs, which is where I ended up with JP Morgan. And the reason why I started focusing on the rotational programs is because unlike entry-level roles, those are specific for graduating seniors. So that was something that pretty much when I went on Indeed, I just typed in rotational programs and started looking at all the different areas that companies offer and figuring out where the best fit is. With that being said, also researching the different areas of HR. I know I ran through that slide pretty quickly, but even just like Googling different areas of human resources can also help you stand out. When I used to recruit for HR, it was very interesting. The question I loved asking people was, what do you know about human resources? And it was funny to hear the different responses that we got because it was kind of, again, proving the point that I think we need to demystify what human resources actually is. And it was interesting that you can tell people who actually research into human resources versus those who think they had a better idea of it. And that will definitely help you stand out in your career search. And the last two things are Penn State specific. Utilize the career services and the career enrichment network. I worked with Susan back when I was in college. I graduated in 2015 and we still are connected. And I think that's a testament to the initiatives and everything that's done through the career enrichment network. There's so many resources at your disposal, and just asking around and seeing what different opportunities you have available for you will really help you navigate the career search even easier. Which leads me to the last point is just register or sign up to be a liberal arts mentee. I had the same mentor through probably the end of my sophomore year through graduation, and we still stay in contact. We actually both worked at Deloitte at the same time, so we were able to connect again. And for me, it was just nice to have someone objectively look at my resume, my internship search, and just give some interview tips. I remember every single time my junior year when I was interviewing for internships, I was calling her before every single interview to make sure that we can practice and just kind of get those nonverbals out of the way that I may be doing on calls. That it was just really helpful to have someone who's been in my field before, who has kind of navigated the different areas that I haven't seen yet. And having that advice was just super helpful. And then last but not least, wanted to give some recruiting tips as well. So probably the biggest thing we get asked about is resumes and cover letters. And there's really no right or wrong way to do a resume, but the resume should act as a standalone document that really tells a recruiter where you're at and where you're going. I recommend, especially while you're in college, to keep your resume to one page and using your most relevant experience for the specific job that you're looking for. Keep it clear and concise with your bullet points, but also adding those quantitative examples where applicable. So for example, if you've managed like a team of 10, like make sure you include those numbers in there because it really helps you, the recruiter, paint a better picture of your experience and your background. Using action verbs. So typically starting off every bullet with like some type of action verb, and making sure you're using the right tense. So if it's a current job, keep it current. But if it's something that you've done in the past, you can say like researched versus research. Just little things, especially as you're building out the resumes, things that recruiters will look for. Highlighting those transferable experiences. Something that I still do to this day as I look for jobs is I'll pull up the job description and then I'll copy and paste it into Word. And under each area of what the job entails, I'll put like sub bullets of like where my experience matches that. And it helped me realize that I'm more qualified for jobs than I initially thought I was, especially as you're drawing from experiences that you may not realize have parallels. The example I always give is when before I was an intern at Liberty Mutual, I was a cashier at a supermarket in New Jersey. And I was like, there's no way this will set me up for an internship because I was just a cashier. And I started looking at my resume with my mentor and she's like, well, what else did you do other than just like be at a register? And I'm like, well, I used to train the new hires because I was there for so long. And she's like, well, that's training and development. That's learning and development. You can include that in your resume as something that you've done to help that kind of falls into the HR bucket. So finding those different parallels will make you realize that you're more qualified for the jobs than you think, but also kind of calm you down. I think especially going into interviews, I felt more confident that my experience matched the job when I actually took a step back and looked at every single area of the job focus and realized that there's a lot of parallels I can draw. Spelling and grammar and formatting is key. I shy away from templates. I think it's especially when recruiters are looking at resumes, they'll just skim it. And I think sometimes the templates can be a little distracting from the content that's on the resume. So I would try to use as least formatting as possible and just keep it as structured and just as clean and concise as possible. And then finally, just saving the document as a PDF. On the back end of that, it just makes the recruiter's life so much easier because they download resumes in bulk and Word documents do not pull when you do that. So they'll have to be separated. So once you're done with your resume, just save it as like your first and last name and then save it as a PDF and upload it and it will make the recruiter's life so much easier. So that's all the advice I have. But Susan, I know you have some questions as well, so I'm happy to answer anything.
I do. So thank you so much. And I love just giving students a sense of what HR is and what HR isn't, because I do think we all have this kind of preconceived notions based on cartoons or conversations or TV shows. One of the things that I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit about is you mentioned, of course, that you were an LER major and then a psych minor. What kind of an educational background do you think is most important for a human resources professional? Because I'll sometimes also meet with students who are in a variety of majors who have, I think, good transferable skills to be successful in HR. So I just wondered if you had an opinion on that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because when I first started at JP Morgan, when we went around we went around the room for the HR rotational program, and everyone said their majors, I was the only person who had an HR degree. So I thought that was interesting because I assumed that everyone was going to have like a variation of an HR degree. But I think to your point, Susan, there's so many transferable skills in pretty much any type of major that as long as you can, one, build a case for how your experience matched it. A lot of people talk about their coursework and the different things that they did that kind of set them up for success in human resources. But we've had people in all different walks of life. A lot of them are liberal arts majors, but I would say that if they have an interest in like people and just like the business area, there hasn't been anyone who's kind of shied away from that, from interested in HR. But for me, when I look at a resume, sometimes I'll even skim over the degree and I look right at their experience. That because some people may have relevant experience, but not the relevant degree. I would say maybe for more like finance or like business type roles, they may look more at the degree, but human resources is so broad that there's so many different areas you can go into that there's experience that will really match any different major or minor.
That's awesome. Thank you for confirming that because as I said, I often meet with students who are maybe a variety of majors thinking about HR, but feeling maybe a little not as confident.
Yeah.
Gabrielle, we were just doing questions. Is there anything that you kind of brought you to the session today that you wanted to throw out there for Todd?
Yeah, hi, I'm a junior at Penn State and I'm majoring in human resources and minoring in business. So yeah, I had a past internship that focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion related in HR, so I'm looking to expand within the field of HR overall and find an internship this summer in New York.
That's awesome. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is a really hot space, and it's something that's growing in pretty much every job, but also especially within that space, there's so many transferable skills that like a lot of people go into like recruiting and learning and development from those different areas. Also project management, because there's a lot of different projects that come through the DE&I space that is definitely relevant. So that's awesome.
Yeah, so if there were any tips for like an interview or anything that you recommend.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because right before this, we were talking about the different areas of human resources. And that's one of the areas where I didn't even fully know that fit into HR until I graduated and was in the workforce. That D&I has been something that I think has probably grown over the last couple of years, but it's something that to even to know that that's an area that you want to go into, I think is awesome. But also just like keeping an open mind with the different majors or the different areas of HR, because some companies won't even place interns until the spring. But like you may accept an offer for an HR internship, and then in the spring they may kind of reach out and find out what your experiences are, or like the skill sets that you want to hone in on, or they'll just place you into a role based off of what demand that they have. So I think keeping an open mind is probably the biggest thing, but also just going on Indeed, typing in human resources and seeing what comes up. A lot of the financial services have already started interviewing. I know the entertainment industry is just starting right now, so we haven't even done interviews yet. So our interviews won't even start until the new year. But I recommend checking Indeed out. And I think I know the Career Enrichment Network. Do you guys is it Handshake that you guys use?
We have a platform called Nittany Lion Careers. And so
Nice.
one of the tips I always suggest to students is if you know, for example, that you want to look for HR roles, you can go into Nittany Lion Careers and in the keyword search, just type in HR or human resources, and then you can save that search. And the default for a saved search is that the system will send you an email once a week with any new positions that match those search criteria. So you can kind of let the artificial intelligence do a little bit of work for you, and then that frees up your time so that you can go look on other sites like Indeed or on LinkedIn Jobs, any other kind of sites. So Todd, you were talking a little bit before about the different industries that you've worked in for HR. I guess maybe thoughts about that? Like Gabrielle, do you have a particular industry that you're focusing on, or you just want to be in New York?
Like what kind of a company or?
Mm-hmm.
I've been looking at some of the like top Fortune 100 companies, but I'm very just like open to anything, and my main thing is like what makes someone like a good, like besides having the grades and all that, because I feel like that I've met those needs more so like what makes someone stand out in an interview for the position, like what do they look for, like I've done some research like about companies, and also given some background on like past experiences at school, like my past internships, but like what's some things to like look out for within interviews?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think in general, we're like looking at industries, to answer that first part of the question, is that I was telling Susan before that like I wish I would have known now what I've known when I was looking at jobs, because I was basing my jobs off of location. Like I wanted to be in Boston for the summer, so I found an internship in Boston. And I didn't really know enough about the industries, which I wish I would have done more research on, because I feel like you can definitely tell, like I'm in the entertainment industry now and it's completely different than the financial industry. And some people thrive in one or the other or both. I've found my footing probably more in the entertainment industry, but I know a lot of people have no desire to leave the financial industry. The financial industry is a little more regulated, which I think some people just like that structure. So it really depends on the person, but it's something that I know some people prioritize versus some people just look at the location or the type of role. I knew I wanted to stay in the tri-state area long term. So when I was looking for opportunities, I knew I wanted to end up in New York eventually, and JP Morgan was that fit that I knew I would be able to get there throughout my career path. But to answer your question, I think being able to look at the job and find the parallels between your internship experience is huge, and highlighting the internship experience that you've had. I know for me, like when I look at resumes, I immediately usually just skim down to see what the prior experience are, especially if the role has a very specific focus, like trying to see if there's parallels that we can draw. So I would even, one of the tips I gave before is like looking at the job description and putting sub bullets under each one to see where your experience matches, and you'll be able to find those parallels a lot more easier than just like looking at a job description and trying to think of it. It'll also make your life so much easier when you're interviewing, that if you get questions that you kind of know where they're getting at because they're referencing the job description, you already have those answers on the back of your mind because you've already figured out like where your skills match that role. But one thing I've also seen that people do on their resumes now is they include hobbies and interests on the bottom. And that was something that I never saw. Like when I was putting my resume together when I was in college, I didn't include that. But I found that that's a good icebreaker for recruiters and for hiring managers, that like they'll see like, oh, like you like baseball, like, oh, like what teams do you watch, like, or you like, or like I see you like reality TV, like what shows do you watch? So it's funny because those are easy ways to kind of make yourself, one, I feel like it calms people down when they're interviewing because they feel like their human side is coming out versus feeling like they have to be so almost like robotic on an interview. But it also just gets the hiring manager and recruiter to know you better than just your experience. So it's really all about just like the intentionality behind your resume and your cover letter too, if you choose to put one together.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, and what is your, so you're a Penn State alumni?
Correct. So I graduated in I think my Wi-Fi is spotty, so I apologize if I keep coming in and out. I graduated in 2015. I majored in labor studies and employment relations. Yeah. So I've been in human resources pretty much my entire career. So I interned in HR, and I've been in HR ever since. So it's been, one of the advice I gave before is just to like kind of demystify what HR is. I think a lot of people, like, especially if you ask like my friends what I do, they say like the first thing they say is hiring and firing people. Yeah. And I do hire people because I'm in recruiting, but never fired anyone. So like, I think it's just demystifying what that actually means and like seeing how broad of a scope it actually is. I know Susan's going to send out the recording after this, but there was a slide I showed about the different areas of human resources and just like how broad it really is. And it's great that you already have an interest in D&I because there's even relevant areas of HR that kind of like piggyback off of that as well. That could be even a broader scope. So just the possibilities are endless.
Great.
So you talked a little bit before, Todd, about your alumni mentor and how they were a great resource for you, and then a little bit about networking. So could you maybe touch on the importance of networking in your own career path, both as an undergraduate and then as you've been kind of moving from roles and switching up industries, how that's happened and how networking might have affected that?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like people hear about networking and the advice sounds so cliche, but it's really a lot about navigating the corporate world. It's like who you know. And I think that for me, I've benefited a lot from networking and just like keeping those connections intact because you never know when you're going to talk to someone again or run into someone. And an example is in my fourth rotation at JP Morgan, I worked on a campus recruiting project and I really enjoyed the manager that I was working with. We really hit it off. And then I ended up moving to New York and so did she. So we were both and she was in a more senior position. So we were both working in the same office, and it was nice to already know someone off the bat as soon as I got into the New York office. And then I went to Deloitte, and I was still trying to figure out where the next career move that made the most sense is. And I started reaching out to some of my colleagues, and I reached out to this manager to say like, oh, look, if you have any opportunities open, like would love to explore different areas outside of where I currently am. And she was like, well, I'm building out my campus recruiting team at Amex, and I think you'd be a great fit to help build out our summer program. So I ended up joining that team from Deloitte. And I just having that connection, like she ended up going to American Express from JP Morgan. So I had that connection from JP Morgan. I kept it intact, and it helped me get to my next role. So really developing those relationships and keeping them going is something that like, it's probably easier said than done, but it goes a long way in just helping you develop your overall your network, because you'll be surprised. Like you never want to burn a bridge because you'll never know when you run into them again. And there's people who, ironically, who I worked with at Amex who were also on the same floor as me as JP Morgan. So you never know outside of the person who I already knew who's going to be there. So like you never know who you're going to run into. So networking is just really helpful. And it's also nice to just like pick someone else's brain about something that like I sometimes feel like I'll look at my resume and I'm like, I've been staring at this for like hours. I'm like, I need someone else to just like tear it apart. And I'll send it to one of my mentors, and they will like completely just redo it and like tell me different areas that like I didn't even catch because I've just been staring at it for so long. So it's really what you make of it. And it's finding the people who I try to find people who like mirror what like I want to be. So like that person at American Express was that person for me.
So any other questions? You can put questions in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask questions. If there's anything particular you want to know, I always have a million questions, so I'll keep asking as long as Todd will bear with me.
Yeah.
So you said that networking can be, just a really powerful sort of tool in your career search. Any specific tips on maintaining relationships? I think that that's one of the things students really struggle with, because they look at it as a very transactional, like I'm going to talk to this person because I hope they'll get me a job. But any tips about how to maybe approach that differently and some ways that you've maintained relationships?
I think LinkedIn is great. I feel like it's like Facebook for jobs. I feel like I kept in touch with a lot of my colleagues just through LinkedIn and like message them, be like, oh, like I see that you're working on this project based off of what you just posted on LinkedIn, like hope all is well. And like, I think you have to do kind of to your point, Susan, of like reaching out sometimes just to like check in without having like an ask. Of just being like, hey, I just want to check in. Like I was thinking about you, like how's everything going with work, and like having that rapport built. So then when you do have a question, because what you don't want to happen is you feel like you're only reaching out to someone when you need something, because that's not going to be it's going to feel more transactional. That sometimes I'll see someone on LinkedIn who like likes something. I'm like, oh, I haven't talked to them in a while. And I'll just message them and be like, hey, how are you? How are things going? And there's not like an ask at the end of it, which I think makes things feel more personable and just more personal in general. So then when there are times where you may have an actual question, it feels less like you're only reaching out to them because you need something. And I think people can tell when I've had people reach out to me and they're just like, hey, how are you? And the next line is like, hey, so here's my resume. And I'm like, I haven't talked to you in like 3 years. Like, I feel like you need to build up like more of a rapport of a conversation before asking for something.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways I heard it explained recently that just really struck me because it makes so much sense is if you want someone to be interested in you, then you need to show that you're interested in them.
Exactly.
Like we're human beings, it's a two-way street. And so that's just something that you need to consider. And that's not that you shouldn't ask of people, but at the same time, also be willing to give.
Yeah, definitely. Like, even my mentor, when in college, like I like knew about her kids. I knew about like just like her things that she did for fun, and we found common ground on other things other than just like being in HR. And I think that's super important too, that like, again, people can feel when something feels transactional. And that's the last thing you want to do, especially as you're trying to build your network and kind of help navigate your career search and everything.
So that makes a good segue. Tell me a little bit about LinkedIn and how do you advise students to build an effective profile and how to use LinkedIn as a student? I get a lot of these questions, and usually it's something like, I have a LinkedIn profile, I'm not really sure what to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because being in recruiting, I feel bad, but I get so many like emails every day because people see my title as a recruiter and they just will like cold email me, which is great. I think especially with sourcing, it helps a lot of recruiters that like they can always just reach out and send over their resume. It never hurts to send out your resume via LinkedIn message, but like be able to find common ground versus just sending out a message. Like people can tell when you're just like sending out a message just to send it and you're just copying and pasting it. But I feel like a lot of people use it just to network as well. I joined a lot of groups within, like I think I'm in like, there's a lot of Penn State groups that I'm in, different companies that I'm interested in. Like I've looked through there and see like sometimes there's like forums that I've just commented on. But I think including pretty much mirroring your resume as much as you can. I think it's been helpful because like a lot of recruiters solely look at LinkedIn, and there's like different LinkedIn recruiter access that gives you a back end of like all their information that sometimes it's easier if they're quick skimming through a bunch of candidates that they can see like some people put in their header like interested in HR opportunities or having that. I think LinkedIn has a new thing on the top of your picture where you can put like looking for opportunities that like, especially if you're a recruiter sourcing for roles, like that's exactly what they're looking for. So I think it depends. I think it almost goes back to the networking that if you're going to reach out to a recruiter, like try to make it feel more personalized because they probably get so many different responses that like you need to make sure you stand out, and finding common ground with them, even just based off of their profile, makes a lot better than just like sending someone your resume when like they haven't really established a relationship with you yet. So it really depends on the recruiter and like how they choose to source. But like I know most people who are recruiters, like when I was a recruiter, I only looked at LinkedIn. And it was just easy to filter on people based off of like the industry that they were interested in and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure that students always realize how powerful LinkedIn is. So I try to share a little bit about how to look up Penn State alumni, how you can reach out to alumni, and you already have that Penn State connection. And we talk a lot about the power of the Penn State network. And I think as a student, it's not always super clear how to tap into that. And I think LinkedIn is one of those ways you can do it. But I always encourage, make sure you're personalizing your message, like, hey, I'm a fellow Penn Stater, or, you know, I met with somebody at the Career Enrichment Network and they showed me your profile, you know, like make that case of how you want to connect and what kind of common ground you have versus the generic, I'd like to add you to my LinkedIn network message.
Yeah, no, it's true. And even and it's funny because I was a tour guide, so I used to like spit out all these facts about like we have the best alumni network in the world, but like you actually see it post grad that like when you like people's face light up when they see like another Penn Stater, where you don't see that with a lot of other schools. That like I always can tell like everywhere I've worked that they're like, oh, he's a Penn Stater. And like it's always like I was just emailing an intern yesterday and I saw that like her email had at PSU and like we are her in the email. And it's just like things that like you don't see that school spirit at every school. So use that to your advantage when you can.
Any other questions from the students in the call before I go through my list here?
Yeah, I just was wondering, what do you recommend in terms of like reaching out, like post an interview, you know, staying in touch in that sense? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it never hurts to send a follow-up message. I think the one thing that I've learned and now I've seen on the back end is like don't always expect a reply, and also no reply doesn't mean that like it didn't go well. Sometimes they get a lot of responses or their emails are swamped or they're just swamped in general that they may not respond to it, but it never hurts to send an email, a follow-up, but make sure again to Susan's point about just making sure it's personalized, like finding connections from your interview to be like, oh, like I love that we talked about XYZ, like it really solidified my interest in the role. And make it look again that it's not just like a generic thank you email and looks like that you're like, oh, like I found these takeaways and I think I would be a great fit for it. One thing that I've done in my thank you emails is I've also like reiterated some of my like relevant experience and like try to frame it in a way of like I'm confident that my my internship in XYZ or like my experience in so and so like will set me up for success in the type of role like this. So it's some people will look at them. I know some people expect them, but it's better to send one than to not.
So you mentioned before when we were talking a little bit about LinkedIn that you'll sometimes follow companies or some of the Penn State organizations like the Alumni Association or the College of the Liberal Arts Alumni Group. Do you have any suggestions or tips about the kinds of things that students could be doing or should be doing throughout their undergraduate careers if they're thinking about a career in HR, whether they're an LER, psych major, or maybe one of those other majors with those transferable skills? Like what kinds of activities do you think people should really be trying to engage in while they're still here at school?
Definitely. I was in SHRM, which was really helpful because that also kind of helped me. It was nice to be around people who kind of understood HR or like understood like what the different areas of success could be within HR that I didn't see in a lot of my other clubs if they just didn't know what HR was. So I think being around people who kind of were on like the same common ground was really helpful. And I think for me, and I'm not just saying this, I think my liberal arts clubs really helped me. I think because I was in LAUC from my freshman year I was an Envoy since my sophomore year, that I think building those connections with with you in the career enrichment network, but also just like people within liberal arts, I think also kind of helped me build a broader network. That everyone, you never know who knows you never know who knows who. And I met someone in LUC, Lauren Parati, and she was telling me about line ambassadors, and I ended up joining line ambassadors based off a recommendation from her. And the skill sets that I learned within line ambassadors and within the liberal arts ambassadors, which at the time was called Envoys, were perfect transferable skills that I was able to put on my resume. And not only did I build a really great network and really great college experience, it was something that I was able to say like, oh, like I was a leader on campus. I helped give tours. Like I helped within the liberal arts college, and like things like that. Like recruiters like to see that you've done stuff outside the classroom, whether it's a part-time job or like some type of club. So one thing I try to do throughout my time is find things that like almost kind of help me build my resume. Like even when I was involved in Thon, I was a captain for donor alumni relations. And I picked that one because I felt like it was the most transferable for like a corporate job. And it was so much fun. And it was able to, another like an example to speak to on interviews of just like teamwork and just like camaraderie, but also like project management, because we were balancing school and being a Thon captain. So there's like different things that, again, you can try to find transferable skills in everything. I think that's like the creativity aspect that recruiters look for, to see like you're like I said, I was a cashier, but like I also help train cashiers, which is training, which is part of HR. So you can definitely find those parallels, and just make the most of your college experience. Because I would say a lot of recruiters will look at a resume and say, okay, you have like a 4.0, but you didn't do anything outside the classroom. So it's like, we want to see like a well-rounded experience that you can also contribute to a company culture that way as well.
What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, this is just a general question in terms of stuff, but do you recommend that it's beneficial to get a master's before entering work for HR, or to get experience? Because I was actually offered to do a 5-year program for a master's, and so I'm planning on getting an internship this summer, but I was just wondering, like, is it more beneficial to finish everything now, or because I know that I'm gonna it's beneficial to have a master's anyways, so
yeah, well, first off, that's awesome. I would say it depends on the person. I eventually will probably go get my master's in HR or just some type of advanced degree, but I found a lot of success without having an advanced degree. But also I know people who have also found success in staying a 5th year and doing and getting a master's in human resources. I think it's all personal preference. You can still definitely get an internship and get experience with it. I think it's kind of what you do with it. I knew for me, like I know there was a 5-year program. I just chose to go right into my position, but I know people who have amazing jobs who stayed the 5th year and got it. It's a personal preference. So there's no right or wrong answer. I don't think I would look at a resume and say like, oh, like they didn't get a master's in HR, like we're not going to consider them. But there were people in my HR program at JP Morgan who had their masters, and like they had the same level of opportunities as all of us, but also like it's sometimes depending on where you work, some people will prefer that. So it's really, again, just like a personal preference, but I think you can win either way.
And my mom actually works at JP Morgan in New York.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a great network, and it's something that I think being in the financial services industry like really set me up for success to where I am now. I think I almost needed, I needed to go through a lot of like a company that was very like regulated and structured, because I feel like it helped me build like a business acumen and like more professionalism, which I definitely probably needed post-grad. So I think that environment really helped me grow almost like at an accelerated pace. So it's awesome.
So Todd, when I think about, I think it's such a great question about the master's program. When you think about your colleagues who are maybe at higher management roles in human resources, do they typically have advanced degrees in human resources, or are they people who maybe have done an MBA, or is it really just kind of all over the place?
It's really all over the place. There's some people who like, they have like I think it's like a PHR. I think I'm blanking on what that stands for, but there's like a bunch of different like certificates and certifications that you can get within HR. I eventually will probably go back, but I feel like because I went through the HR rotational program, I almost felt like that was like my like crash course in HR, that I got to see so much exposure at such an early point in my career. But there's no right or wrong answer. I feel like some people go back to get their MBA because they can get a higher like compensation when they're looking for jobs, and some companies will compensate you more because you have that advanced degree. But I I'm proud of kind of where I've navigated, and I will eventually probably go back to for additional schooling. But I think for right now, I think my experience kind of trained me to get to where I am now. But again, there's no right or wrong answer. I know some of my colleagues have an MBA. I don't see a ton of MBAs as much within human resources, but I've seen just like general master's degrees and like certifications within HR.
Okay, cool. Other questions? Anything else that anyone would like to ask of Todd? My last one then is, in your role in campus recruitment, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see students making at any point in the process? And then on the flip side of it, what makes a candidate really stand out for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I feel like that interest shifted within the virtual environment. But I would say for me, like, I think people who do their research, I think sometimes people will go up to a recruiter and expect them to like tell everything. But the students who have always stood out are the ones who have clearly done their research and like have prepared questions and like their resume is good to go and everything. I think even just like, especially when you meet with so many people, like be able to stand out and like have those like experiences to talk to and like have your elevator pitch and have like just like talking points ready to go. It's when you talk to so many candidates, those people stand out the most to me. And I think it's just again like the professionalism and like just making sure that you're like not like bad mouthing another company or bad mouthing an experience, like trying to twist everything to a positive. I think sometimes people will probably get stuck in like things that maybe didn't go well, that they don't focus on like turning into like a learning lesson. Which is something that I learned that like I think like my Achilles heel question, if that's a thing, was like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? And like I always struggle with that weakness question, but I've learned now to like twist it to a positive. That I would say that's probably one of the areas where sometimes, especially when you're looking at high volume, people may fall short. I would say it's an odd thing, but like I think I mentioned the resumes of like uploading a Word document versus a PDF. I've worked at 4 companies at this point, and every recruiter will like go crazy when they have a pile of PDFs and they have one Word resume, because the formatting doesn't pull the same way that a PDF does. So like when you PDF it, that like the formatting sticks. Whereas is when you download a Word document, sometimes it may look like 1 page on yours, but on our end it'll be like 6 pages, and some people may just skim right over that because there's enough PDFs that they can look through. So that's something that like can be a missed opportunity. But I think the only other thing for me as a program manager when I manage interns is the one area that always kind of separates like the good from the great is like the open mind of the role that you're going to be in for the summer. That sometimes like an internship, like you may not get the exact role that you're interested in, but what you make of it is something that will really set you up for success. That like I've been in roles where I had someone who didn't want to rotate through or didn't want to intern in compensation, and by the end of the summer realized that it was like the perfect experience, and she ended up requesting to come back as a full-time analyst within compensation. But I've also had people who moved into like learning development and realized that very early on it wasn't a fit for them. And instead of finding those transferable skills and finding ways to like make it a good experience, they just like couldn't get out of their head that it wasn't what they looked for. And they didn't end up getting an offer at the end of the summer because like people were like, if you're not going to be like, you're not always going to be aligned to the best project or like team or like initiative, that like you have to keep an open mind and find the positive in it, or it'll just like consume you. So And
I think that's such a great way to think about it too. You know, you don't know what you don't know. And the best way to figure it out is sometimes by that firsthand experience. If you got the role that you thought you wanted and then realized it wasn't the best fit, you know, taking advantage of the opportunity to talk with people who were in other areas and get some exposure. And the same for students, you know, talking with alumni like Todd, who can give you some perspective on their own path and share a little bit of their own experience, or reaching out to people through LinkedIn, or talking to recruiters. Like we have so many recruiters who come and do presentations on resumes and cover letters, whatever, and they're usually representing their own organizations, but they are recruiters. That's their job. So if you just wanted to ask them, what's it like being a recruiter for company X? I think most of them would be very happy to talk with you about it. So I'm just trying to encourage students to take advantage of that chance to ask questions and try to learn from others' experiences and figure out for yourself, you know, they sound like maybe we're a little bit similar. Maybe I would like some of the things they like, or no, that sounds like we're kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. So maybe I should be looking at different things. So.
Yeah, definitely. I always remember when we had our training when I was at JP Morgan as a rotational analyst, and I was like, we were meeting with a lot of senior executives, and I was so nervous to ask like the wrong question. So I just wouldn't say anything. And then I watched someone across the table from me ask the question and then or celebrated for asking it. And I'm like, if I just like spoke up, like I would be able to like make a better impact. And like since then I was like, I'm just going to continue to ask questions and like I think people assume automatically, especially as an intern level, that they need to know everything. They can't ask questions. And like, I feel like if I didn't ask questions, I wouldn't be where I am now, because mistakes are inevitable and you rather be proactive about it than have to like loop in other people if something goes wrong. So
yeah, it's a lot easier to ask the question on the front end than try to correct an error on the back end.
Exactly.
And I think that's just maybe a great note to kind of wrap up on, like, ask questions. That's the sort of the motto of the day. People are often willing to answer. And I think I've certainly been in plenty of situations in my career where maybe I felt a little bit weird asking the question, but then after I asked the question, other people at the table would be like, yeah, because no one knew, but no one wanted to be the one to ask the question either. So
that happens all the time.
Yeah, you can be that brave soul who kind of puts it out there, and everyone else in the meeting is going to be thanking you for it. I didn't know what they were talking about either. So, well, Todd, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today and share your experiences and your career path. It's always super fun for me to reconnect with someone that I knew as a student and to see how their career has progressed and they've been so successful. So we really appreciate your time.